What is the main difference between these two people? Well, you might say that Socrates is virtuous and good, and isn't he known for saying,
"It is better to suffer injustice than to commit injustice."
And the Austrian painter, on the other hand, is the complete opposite of that, and has said things like,
"The stronger must dominate and not blend with the weaker, thus sacrificing his own greatness."
At first glance, these two figures seem like complete opposites, but what if I told you they might not be so different after all? The year is 404 BC. A man named Critias, leading the anti-democratic faction in Athens with the help of Sparta, should seize power and overthrew democracy. The result? Hundreds of Athenians were murdered or exiled. Now, it is important to remember that ancient Greece wasn't a unified nation like it is today. Back then, it was made of independent city-states, each with its own idea of governance: democracy, tyranny, aristocracy, and oligarchy. These differences often led to internal conflicts and wars between city-states and within city-states. So, while what Critias did was brutal, it wasn't entirely crazy for the time. But the reason he did it for was... Critias, once a political philosopher turned tyrant, believed that morality, religion, and customs were merely tools invented by the weak to control the strong. In his eyes, the natural order was that the strong should rule over the weak, and all those morals and religious rules were convention that got in the way of this natural hierarchy. Critias wasn't just a tyrant, he was what some historians have called the
Austrian painter
of ancient Greece. He and his faction radicalized the Spartan way of life, creating a regime that believed in eugenics and the dominance of the strong. In his brief rule, he killed more Athenians than died in the decades of war with Sparta. He expelled most of the population, he killed the priests for being tedious religious moralists, and burned down the docks, which he saw as the heart of Athenian democracy. He saw the Sparta constitution as the creation of one supreme specimen. Critias wanted to fund a state based on these ideas. Now, you may be saying, what does this have anything to do with Socrates? Well, you see, Socrates was Critias' teacher, and Critias was Plato's uncle. Now, both Socrates and Plato are celebrated for being critics of tyranny. So how did Critias, a student of Socrates, become a tyrant, while Plato, also a student of Socrates, become one of the most vocal opponents of tyranny, right? Well, to understand this, we need to explore a key distinction that both Socrates and Critias examine: the difference between physis, nature, and nomos, convention. You see, for most of human history, people didn't separate the laws of nature from the rules of society. To them, the wasting worked in the natural world, like the seasons changing and the rivers flowing, was connected to the way human society functioned. Morality, laws, and even religious customs were thought to be part of the natural order, as unchangeable as the sunrise. But Greek philosophers, including Socrates, were among the first to intellectualize this difference. They started asking, are these rules natural, or have they been created by humans to maintain control? This type of questioning laid the foundation for some pretty controversial and revolutionary ideas. It's important to understand that many of these early philosophers came from aristocratic warrior backgrounds. Unlike today, when we hear aristocrats, we picture wealthy, privileged elites that are detached from any struggle, let alone physical struggle. But you see, ancient Greek aristocrats were also warriors. Their ancestors were nomadic, pastoral people, toughened by a life of constant movement and survival. These pastoral ancestors were larger and stronger and more skilled in combat than the farming populations they often conquered. Through breeding animals, these pastoral people were among the first to recognize the difference between what is natural and what is controlled by human convention. This knowledge of nature and selective breeding didn't just stop with animals, it shaped how they thought about society and governance. In The Republic by Plato, Plato suggests that the guardian class should practice selective breeding much like how they bred their livestock. Only the most virtuous and capable individuals should reproduce, ensuring that society remains strong and just. Plato believed that true justice was rooted in nature, and could only be understood by those trained to see beyond human convention. Plato also criticized democracy as a system ruled by nomos, by convention, and instead advocated for rule by philosopher kings, those who could understand the natural order of justice and virtue. But why did philosophy shift from beliefs aligned with Critias' tyrannical rule to the ideas that opposed tyranny? Well, Critias and the 30 tyrants happened. After the brutal rule, philosophers became associated with tyranny in the public mind. Many Greeks saw philosophers as dangerous because of Critias' action, and you can't really blame them for it. Philosophers were seen as teachers of tyranny. As historian Costin Vlad Alamariu puts it, the philosopher and the tyrant are kindred types. The same Jude who become a philosopher may also become a tyrant. Plato himself, according to Alamariu, may have believed this connection between philosophy and tyranny, but couldn't openly say so. Instead, Plato gave philosophy a mask, a political mask, one that could protect it from the tyranny allegations. Both Plato and Xenophon go to great lengths in their apologies to claim that Socrates did not teach tyranny or much of anything, but these defenses seem almost too weak, raising suspicion about their sincerity. Could it be that Socrates, Plato, and Critias all share the same core ideas, but expressed them differently? This brings us to Plato's Gorgias, where some of the deeper concerns about the relationship between tyranny and philosophy are addressed. In this dialogue, Socrates debates with the character Callicles, who argues that the natural law, physis, dictates that the strong should rule over the weak, and that social conventions, nomos, are merely tools used by the weak to control the strong. Callicles' speech is striking because he argues for a form of might makes right, which closely resembles Critias' views on power and domination. Some scholars, like Alamariu, suggest that Callicles might be a mouthpiece for Plato's own hidden views, that while Plato publicly condemned tyranny, he may have shared some of the same concerns about the tension between nature and convention. In Gorgias, Socrates challenges Callicles' ideas, arguing that true justice is not about raw power, but about virtue and wisdom. However, the passion and intensity of Callicles' speech have led some to speculate that Plato was grappling with these ideas more deeply than he openly admitted. In conclusion, after Critias and the 30 tyrants overthrew the democracy in Athens, public sentiment began to shift against philosophers and their ideas, especially those related to nature. Many Athenians blamed philosophy for the rise of tyrants like Critias, and this led to the persecution and exile of several philosophers from Athens. Many of Socrates' followers, including some who played a role in both the political upheavals that overthrew the democracy, faced scrutiny. Xenophon himself was exiled from Athens, and like many of Socrates' followers, spent the rest of his life in Sparta. The connection between Socrates and Sparta was often noted by critics like Aristophanes, who satirized Socrates and his followers as Sparta mad, describing them as long-haired, half-starved, unwashed, Socratified with cycles in their hands. Plato also admired aspects of Spartan society, especially its rigid social order. In the Republic, Plato's vision of an ideal state reflects many Spartan ideals, including strict state control over procreation. He believed that human breeding should be regulated, just as animal breeding is, writing the best men should cohabit with the best women as often as possible, and the worst with the worst as seldom as possible, if the flock is to be as perfect as possible. Costin goes further to argue the hidden or esoteric role of philosophy is to revitalize the superior man. In this view, philosophy teaches the superior man to see the nomos, aka convention, and morality are relative and depend on context. Through philosophical thought, the superior man frees himself from the constraints of morality and returns to nature, physis, where the strong naturally dominate the weak. Throughout history, according to Costin, philosophical schools have often secretly conspired against governments, seeking to install their own philosopher king. What I've discussed in this video was my attempt to break down and explain Costin Vlad Alamariu's dissertation, Selective Breeding, and the Birth of Philosophy. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you guys like and subscribe, you know the drill. And let me know what you guys thought about it down below, and if you guys agree with Costin's dissertation or not. I'm interested to know what you think.